welcome everybody to our December 16th Finance and Audit Committee regular meeting. Start us, we'll call our meeting order, but we're going to start the roll call. Ruthie?
Yes. Director Gallagher?
Yes.
Julie Peterson? Yes. Maxwell Randy?
Yes.
Jessica Dixon? Yes. And Chair Pimentel?
Yes. Our next item is if any changes to the agenda. Changes. Public comments is the time set aside for members of the public to address our committee on any item not on the agenda. Do you have anybody public here? Do you have any public comment? Okay, great. No comments. Any comments from committee members? All right. Move on to our agenda for today. Our first item up is agenda item number 1 under consent. Approval of the minutes for October 29th. We have a approval. Thank you. Bill. Thank you, Nico.
Director Gallagher?
Yes.
Julie Peterson? Yes. Maxwell Randy? Yes. Jessica Dixon? Yes. And Chair Pimentel?
Yes. Item number 2 is our first of our discussion items, financial performance for October 2024.
Well, as she's bringing this up, as you know, we didn't do October and November because of the quick turnaround. And last week, I wasn't sure if we were going to do October and December, but we had enough, the work was done, and we had enough data that we could get together without getting into our shared drive, so able to pull together the presentation. October was really kind of a interesting month because on its own, we would have lost money. We actually, because of the hospital sale and the fact that we booked some of the final entries in the October close related to how we used to book the expense for the MP lease. We would always have a cash payment going out the door, but we were actually booking more expense as part of the amortized interest that was forecasted out over 30, 40 years, a long time. So we were able to get a pickup from that, and the pickup was about $1.8 million, I think. So where you see this big lease expense of a minus 1.4, that's the true up of this MPT amortized interest over the life of the lease. So as a result, we ended up with a positive month at 602, but you can see at the EBITDA line, the operations themselves, we were losing about $800,000. It was in net revenue. We had started to do our deep dive. There was a few, as I was looking back at my notes, there was a few things we were going to do that we were unable to do because, system outage. But really what the basis for the net revenue was somewhat the service mix during the month. We had some things that were higher than month over month, but we had lower in kind of that medical inpatient charges. We had fewer ICU days, so it was kind of the mix of where the days were was really leading to a lower kind of gross revenue per case. And our admissions, as you'll see, they were basically flat. Our outpatient surgeries were down a bit, not drastic, but enough to make a difference. And then we always look at how the accounts that we valued in a previous month kind of maintained that value, or if any of them kind of lost value as activities continued on them and they were revalued the next month. And we did have some change in prior valuations that was a hit to the net revenue. So while we're always still on our path to feel more confident with our net revenue valuations and kind of strengthen our process, I think the analysis that we did do validated the fact that the net revenue that felt lower than it should be was appropriate. Operating expenses were generally, pretty much in line with what we had, what we normally have. Next slide. So the fact that we did get a $600,000 pickup, you can go ahead to the next slide, does put us at a point, through October of a $1.8 million favorable income. Very excited about that, $3.8 million of EBITDA. Little nervous what's gonna happen the rest of the year, because we know we've been spending a lot of money, to get this back up and running, and extra staffing, kind of emergency requests for supplies and things. So, we're just starting that payroll, and I'm kind of on pins and needles this week with the payroll. Hopefully we don't wipe away all of the income that we've been able to bring in so far. Next slide. So, this is just the view that shows, you know, expenses in the blue bars and green being the net revenue line. You know, the good news, even though some of it has kind of come in unusual ways the last couple months as we've brought in things with loan forgiveness that give us revenue recognition, and this MPT lease piece that I was just talking about. Yeah, but we have had at least 3 months in a row where the net revenue is exceeding the expense. I can pretty much guarantee that will not be the case the rest of the way out. Next slide. Admissions, it's very interesting. They're, you know, pretty much flat month over month, but they're also exactly the same as they were in October of 23. So the seasonality is right on point from last year. You'll see that in a lot of the slides that I'm about to show. The next slide. So we ended up with about 8.6 admits per day, slightly down from last year. The admissions and observations slide, the next slide. Same number of admits, but you'll see about 20 more observation cases this year as compared to last October. And basically, you know, we are really tending to run anywhere between 80 and 100 observation admissions every month. Yeah. Next slide. Deliveries, you know, up a little bit from September. We were at 66, you know, pretty close to last year's October of 69. But where I used to think that we kind of operated closer to 70 this year is generally most of the time been below 70. Daily census length of stay, pretty solid. 3.6 was the length of stay. Census was 30.5. Acuity finally kind of bounced back. You know, last couple of months, August and September, acuity had been lower than what we were used to, and at least in October, it did bounce back up to 1.4. I don't have a lot of analysis behind kind of where that increase came, because that would have been some of the stuff that was kind of next on our list of things to look at if we hadn't lost our system access. 1.43, though, is generally in line, you know, and most of our cases, I mean, the largest bulk of our cases is sepsis. We had gone through a coding audit, and so when we were looking at some of the results of the coding audit, we did see opportunities in the queries and the ability to get better documentation, a little more solid documentation and query activity going that could potentially raise the DRG values and move it up into a higher DRG. But we've got work there in terms of educating physicians on, you know, helping them understand what those types of queries and responses, how they help the situation. Outpatient visits per day, you know, it was a pretty decent month in October. We had 128 of the non-ED, which is about 20 more than we were doing this time last year in October, and 6 more ED visits per day. And you know, we've basically seen both of those generally creeping up We've had a couple of months when we've had either staffing challenges or equipment challenges, but for the most part, we have seen those outpatient volumes staying up this year. Surgeries, a decent month on the surgeries, down a little bit in inpatient, down about 8 cases from both September and this time last year, down 14 cases, up 14 cases on the outpatient side from this time last year, down a little bit from September. Robot was a strong month with 25 robot cases, so we've definitely been able to bring that up since this time last year and maintain it at a healthier level. So.
Another question, the header table is October 1st, November 1st, first of the month. Is that like October?
Yeah, that's it.
23, is that for the month of October?
It's for the month of October, yeah. Yeah, you're right. Cosmetic, we can fix that.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, thank you. So outpatient surgeries, kind of a mixed bag. Definitely a higher month in the general surgeries. We had 55 general surgeries. And in most of these cases, ortho was one that we had 15 cases, and it's month over month. You can see it's pretty close. That's a difference of like 2 cases. So most of the time when you see a little bit difference in the coloring, it's a matter of, 2 or 3 cases. Probably the largest one of decline was the OBGYN, had 6 fewer cases this month than the prior month. So, a little mix and match here, but nothing too different. On the inpatient admissions, I think this is where, we did see some decline in the payer mix. The commercial mix was only 15.4% this month. We had seen a little bit higher the last couple of months, and this time last year, I think we were still seeing a stronger mix at 17.3. But I think as you look over this year, it's like we got a lot less, and then we started to kind of build back up. So some of it is the seasonality. I think where we've seen probably some of the most interesting change this year has been in the Medicare fee-for-service, because we've always run in the high 20s to low 30s, and the last couple months we had dropped down to about 24%, but this month we were back up at about 29%. So I think that's really where we're watching. As usual, Alliance is the largest share here at 41%. Next slide. Outpatient, it generally just continues to be pretty consistent. We have 22.7% commercial, little bit declining, I think, on the Medicare fee-for-service. Not necessarily seeing it go to the managed Medicare, so not sure where we might be losing that out. One of the things that worries me is, one of our managed Medicare programs, UHC, they pulled out of Santa Cruz County. So there's not a lot of managed Medicare programs down here already. Having one, the Canopy plan, pull out, that may be, it's going to be interesting to see, because I think the ones that are left are Aetna products that are aligned with Dignity, and Sutter's products. That's about it on October. I just put that one to bed because it feels like a long time ago.
Just a question, I appreciate the outpatient surgery by modality. Just kind of like a big picture, does that speak to the needs in the community, or is that more of our capacity? I mean, the same as July, there was the vascular outpatient. I'm just trying to understand the
much,
on that.
pretty much all year long, it's focused on general surgery, OBGYN, and ortho. I think those have been my top three most of the months. Then, and sometimes podiatry kicks in there a bit. So I think that's what's being referred here. That's probably some of it. Others could speak to it better than I. It's just the stability of the physicians. Yeah, some physician mix change. Yeah.
And understanding where we can grow and use the data points.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very physician dependent. And it will also be interesting as we bring in Dr. Avago and have a primary care physician who's actually referring into our hospital and our specialists, how they can grow.
It's the same question, and maybe, is in any way limited by our capacity, not physicians coming in. I assume we're well below capacity. In the OR? Yes, in the OR. You have extra OR capacity. Okay, thanks.
Well, that's something.
So any questions on October planning committee? Let's move on.
Yeah. So, just as a kind of precursor, we were pretty close on budget. We were definitely planning on coming to December with a budget to be approved. And, the last kind of full day, I'd say, of budget work was like November 27th, the day right before Thanksgiving. We had, Vanessa, Ivory, and I had just spent a lot of time, people like Matco and Phyllis, and of course Jessica and Grace, others had been weighing in on different pieces as we were just trying to get through all the things we wanted to look at to kind of finalize the budget. So I felt pretty good about where the budget was at. The things that were kind of still on the plate were like, can we get a little bit more out of this? Is there anything else we want to look at? And that was our anticipated next, week or so, and we probably would have finalized the budget last week so that it would be ready for this meeting. So then I reached out to Marcus and just asked a little bit about, direction, knowing that we weren't able to do that work because we weren't able to get to our drives where that final work was. But knowing I had some versions from the 26th and 27th of November that had basically the guts of the budget. And, after thinking about some options that he talked about, and just thinking about reality of our systems and how we do this budget in Excel, how we are hoping to be able to upload it into MedHost at a department level, how differently it's been put together this year versus 24 budget, just in terms of resources and kind of how we built it. I didn't want to muddy the waters any more than they're already muddy. So, I talked to him a little bit or through emails about presenting the budget that I had, because I felt it was, at least 95% there, and we could probably live without those final tweaks, and maybe it even gives us a little bit of a buffer. So I am bringing you a budget for hopefully recommendation for approval, and I'll try to, talk through things and see if you're comfortable with that approach. So the first slide here is consolidated summary. Because of the outcomes, I never updated from September year-to-date annualized. Not sure that it would have made a big difference because October would have dragged down some of the things on the net revenue and expense side, but it would have still looked good because of that interest, activity, which was kind of a one-time thing. What you can really see here is when you look at the base, which basically, just kind of rolls everything forward, but applies some, inflation factors and things, it's not a very pretty picture. It actually shows, a $4.5 million loss. It's really when we start to, and we were doing a lot of deep dives into the initiatives, and I'm going to go into those a little bit, and I've brought them forth a little bit before, but, that's what helps kind of turn the tide. It's like we can't just keep doing what we're doing. We have to continually get better and do new things. And so the initiatives bring us to a budget that I'm recommending for approval with a $3.5 million EBITDA and an almost $1.4 million bottom line. And so I'll take you through that in a little more detail. This is the entity summary, but there's not a lot to look at here other than, to kind of point out where things are coming from. $2.7 million of the EBITDA would come from hospital operations and about 2.4 of the income, but of course that's going to get offset by the losses at the clinic, and then we do have some of the EBITDA pickup just from the hospital purchase. Primarily, that's the big ticket item there. Taking that on. So some of the slides you've seen a little bit. I tweaked them just, to kind of finalize things that might have been under review at the time. I've mentioned before we did a CDM decrease overall. It was very strategic, so there are rates that went up, but there are some rates that came down to be able to be more competitive, and we basically weren't getting paid for those extra charges anyway. The contracts are what they are. The initiatives make some of the KPIs look different, and you'll see that in a couple slides where you say, oh, wow, why did we, budget so many admissions? In reality, the base said we were budgeting about a 1% increase in admissions, about 2% on the ED visits, 2.5% on the other outpatient. We've been seeing that kind of, especially on the outpatient, we've been seeing that. We know that there's some opportunity this year with admissions. It's been more about kind of right-sizing observation versus admission, but we know that there's opportunity and that, to operate this hospital effectively, because of the staffing requirements of inpatient units and things, we really do need to build those admissions. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to be successful financially on a low-volume inpatient. We've had to estimate quaff and dish because we don't have Program 9 yet. We have little bits of intel that kind of moving through, being defined, be approved mid-year, maybe a little earlier in 25, and that with the directed payment, hopefully we're going to see more dollars. If we see more dollars, we'll see more expense, but it'll still be at a favorable ratio to us. It'll just be my normal cash challenge of being able to pay the bill to get the money. And we've been very successful in negotiating with DHCS every time on that. There were some other operating revenues, some of this activity we've had around revenue recognition, loan forgiveness. Some of it repeats next year, but much of it doesn't, so we needed to pull that out. And then, we finally have a bad debt collections vendor. Just getting started. I haven't even really seen reports yet in detail, but it's just another opportunity to try to collect some of that self-pay or self-pay after insurance dollars that previously weren't being collected. So we've got a little bit in budget for that. On the expense side, other than the fact that there's one less day in the year, and so that helps from expense per day, inflationary factors kind of range between 2.5% and 4%. Most of them are in the 3 to 3.3%. When we do get volume increases, we tend to get a little bit of efficiency, so the expense is not a one-for-one increase. We've gone through the expenses in a lot of detail. There's a lot of learnings there as we've just looked at expenses and things and tried to I think every time it's about learning more and understanding what's in there and is everything kind of being put to its best use and value. We've added some new expenses. The pro fees is mainly around the radiology group. Staffing, Phyllis has been doing so much work with nursing to get kind of core staffing right and best standards of care. And so we have added some staffing expenses in the nursing area, as well as a couple other positions throughout the hospital. And then much like the hospital, the QAF fees, the receipts being estimated, so are the fees. And I think we were probably tried to be somewhat conservative on both of those. Slide. So here's just a kind of a high-level summary of the initiatives. Each of these major buckets has a number of initiatives in there. We talked a little bit about this at the last meeting, but the new services is generally getting the cath lab up and running, maybe some additional pediatric volume and volume that we would get from Kaiser opening up the facility in Salinas. CHP services are primarily bringing in the primary care practice. Revenue increases. We do have some loan forgiveness that will be booked into next year related to the county loan forgiveness. Is tied to the work that we're doing with the pediatric unit, so we're not taking credit for that loan forgiveness until we earn it. And then, as I mentioned, rev cycle improvements and bad debt vendor will help with the revenue side. Expense side, your typical productivity. We've gone through all the labor standards and looked at both productive and non-productive pay, a little bit of premium pay. Supply chain and trying to go through all the work with our GPO to ensure we're in the right tiers, that we kind of have the right compliance to get the best rate, and looking for, what opportunities we have there. What things maybe we do look at shifting to other vendors for better rates. Some are easy because they're more commodity-like. Some are harder because they're physician or clinical preference, and they've got to go through the process to see if that's really appropriate for our hospital. We are getting the 340B program stood up. Jennifer and others have done an incredible amount of work on that, and we've got a little bit of history to start to base our estimates for next year on, so we took that, but I think we're also continuing work there that could even reap better rewards than what we were able to forecast for the budget. The professional fees is the radiology group. There's an increase in bringing in the new group. And then under the employee retention, these are both things that are cash dependent, but I have budgeted for the opportunity to have some kind of retirement program for the leaders, because most of the union-based staff and the staff that are in management, below management level, they are getting a retirement dollars from us every pay period, and the leadership group isn't. So it's been one of my goals to try to get something built in there. So I've at least put some dollars in from a budget perspective. The when and the how will be very dependent on the cash perspective. also have done the same thing around salary increases. Because the non-union team has not had a salary increase since early 23, January. Next slide. Hospital volumes, we went through this pretty much last time, but this is just where I wanted to point out some of the 14-15% increases is really tied to those initiatives that if we do increase our PEDS volume and the projected Kaiser Salinas volume, you know, it can add 844 patient days, 309 admissions, and so it all of a sudden looks like a much higher year-over-year increase. You know, the Kaiser Salinas projections for the ED visits about 1,100. You know, so you think about that, you know, 3 or 4 of their patients a day. We'll see 65 surgeries, and then of course it's got our cath lab volume from our pro forma that we put together. Next slide. On the KPIs, I think most noticeable or notable, the top one, the percent collectible revenue after bad debt. We feel, you know, that if all these stars align with the initiatives and the work we're doing, that we should be able to, you know, move that from about 13% to 13.5%. Certainly, the more we can also do just in terms of growing commercial mix. I think some of the work we did with the strategic CDM and eliminating charge dollars that weren't going to be payable anyway and just were going to go to revenue deducts. Those are all things that kind of factor into that increase here. As you can see, a little bit of the charge decrease just in the gross revenue per adjusted patient day. So that just takes into account that there were some charges that we reduced, and a lot of that like was in the ultrasound area, and we do a fair number of ultrasounds. So the next. So this is kind of my last slide, which is hoping to, you know, obtain your approval to take this forward to the board tomorrow or next day. Our work behind the scenes is we've got to spread this budget out over the month. We're trying to understand, because we've never loaded the detailed budget into MedHost. We've been running this, you know, Excel model. So we are trying to see if we can do that with this. We will have it in some format, but we would like it in MedHost to help with the reporting for 25. We have to just update our normal reporting packages so that when we do the reporting at the end of January, it has a 25 budget to compare to, things like that. We need to get the budgets out to our leaders so that they start to know what they're accountable for helping us achieve. And of course, also out to our partners as part of our reporting covenant. That's, you know, still a lot of work for us to do here, but I think we know what's ahead of us. That more just a question.
Like home stretch. Yeah.
I hope so. I certainly hope so.
The assumptions are credible. They're the big all along, and so I feel comfortable. I really like this deeper dive I'm doing in it. And you probably might want to go deeper. I don't know if I appreciate that, but it does feel good that we're adopting a budget versus what I was talking about.
Appreciate the brainstorming.
Yeah, but recognizing that I find opportunity to budget and find improvement budget.
Yeah.
It's a bit factor to allow.
Yeah.
So I think we're ready to go to the board. I don't have any questions or assumptions. don't have a problem with the budget.
Julie's done a great job.
Yeah. That's it. I'm sorry my brain goes here, this is way in the weeds again, like the resolution refers to fiscal year. Reasonably comp, like 99.8% of that fiscal year is legally defined as meaning that isn't a calendar year. So that's like way in the weeds, it's on the calendar. They might mislead readers that we have something that's other than a calendar year, but
I'm fine with it being changed to say calendar year, you know.
that's really weedy.
The record Wednesday if you want to, it's more of a clerical issue.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
did that
and then
before I
just
wrote it.
I think it's ready to go to the board. And I anticipate going through the same, or anything different.
I did anticipate it, but I can change something or add,
It's good, it's one of the.
yeah. Now, you know, both Ivory and Vanessa that are online here, they have been deep in the weeds of this budget. They're really responsible for all the modeling that's below it. They're trying to build tools that we can kind of continue to grow on, so that we don't lose track of like how we got to these numbers, and that we feel fairly confident. And there's been a lot of vetting with, you know, Matco and others to, you know, try to understand, because sometimes you just look at the names of vendors, or you look at an expense, and you're like, what really is this? And we go to Grace and Jess a lot, because they're in the weeds of it during the close, and Matco knows a lot of the vendors and the contracts, and so it's definitely been a team effort, but, you know, I have to recognize those two, Ivory and Vanessa, because, you know, you see some of these spreadsheets and that could give you a headache. So thank you.
Thank you, I agree, thank you. Rest of the team, not here. So, able to, ask that we do. Motion to move approval. Board report. Member Gallagher. I'll second.
All right, please roll. Director Gallagher?
Yes.
Jessica Dixon? Yes.